Halloween 3's biggest crime isn't its lack of Michael Myers, it's the fact that it has this little jingle.
8 more days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. 8 more days to Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
This has been in my head for decades.
8 more days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. 8 more days to Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
I've often said that the Halloween sequels are all over the place. Now often I mean that in terms of their inconsistent quality, their strange choose-your-own-adventure style continuities, or their weird, wild and often vastly different takes on the Michael Myers character. When I say that Halloween 3 is all over the place though, I don't mean to say that it's a bad film or an inconsistent one, I just mean to say that in the realm of Halloween sequels specifically, this stands out like a sore thumb. This is the first and only film I'm going to cover in this marathon that is in fact not a slasher film. Yes, I know the theme this year is slasher season, and yeah, I know my original pitch was covering every film in each of these icons' original continuity, and this connects to absolutely none of the other Halloween films. But one, there was no way my brain would let me do videos on Halloween 1, 2 and 4 and not glitch out at the missing number, and 2, shut up, it's my list, and I want to talk about Halloween 3, so yeah. So before we even start on talking about the film though, how did we get here with this absolutely baffling third entry that seemed to be Halloween in name only? Well, as we already mentioned in our previous video, series creators John Carpenter and Deborah Hill hated working on Halloween 2, with Carpenter later going on to call the film an abomination. It was their belief that the story was done and dusted with that original film. Didn't really matter what they thought though, there was still a huge audience desperate to see more of the iconic slasher Michael Myers, and Halloween 2, despite reviewing negatively, especially when compared to the first film, still absolutely slayed at the box office. Seeing that the franchise clearly had financial legs and keen to get Hill and Carpenter involved again, producers Irwin Yablans and Mustafa Akkad both asked the duo if they'd like to come on board for a third film, and Hill and Carpenter surprisingly accepted, but only under one very specific condition: no Michael Myers. So determined were Carpenter and Hill to never do another Halloween sequel like the last, they insisted that this Halloween be a fresh concept or they wouldn't be on it. The aim was to make the franchise an anthology series, a platform from which they could tell an original Halloween-based horror tale with every entry, each one with a decent couple of million in budget, and a solid name legacy to market on. And although it wasn't what they initially had in mind when they approached the duo, at some point along the way, someone agreed to their demands. Though if you ask Yablans, it definitely wasn't him.
I take no responsibility for Halloween 3 or credit. I had nothing to do with it. They just sent me a nice fat check.
So the film instead began production as a story about an evil corporation selling killer Halloween masks to children, and the one alcoholic doctor on his quest to uncover the shady practices of it all. Michael Myers relegated to nothing more than a tongue-in-cheek cameo when an ad for the original movie plays on a bar TV set within the movie. It was a bold and risky move, but one that the people involved were a lot more excited about. Hill and Carpenter took production roles and it became a bit of a passion project that Carpenter still sings the praises of today, mentioning as recently as this year that he loves the movie during an interview for the Halloween Kills press tour. And Tommy Lee Wallace, Carpenter's former editor who had turned down the chance to direct Halloween 2, was more than happy to jump in the chair for this entry, specifically because it was a new story. It wasn't all peaches and cream on the production side though, as the writing ended up being a little messy, with Tommy Lee Wallace credited as the sole writer on the final film, despite he himself being the first one to tell you that is far from the truth, calling it the most inaccurate credit you could ever conceive of in the making of Halloween 3 documentary. You see, what had happened was Deborah Hill had this core concept in her head, a simple idea, just a one-line pitch. Witchcraft in the computer age. And from this concept, a script was optioned from British sci-fi writer Nigel Neal, famous for the hugely influential BBC show The Quatermass Experiment, of which Carpenter was a fan. He put together a screenplay but was resistant to making any changes when given notes, and when the order came down from on high to add more gore to the movie, he asked to have his name removed from the film credits entirely. By this point, John Carpenter has already done some revisions on the script, and then Tommy Lee Wallace also revised those revisions, but in the end was the only one credited. Besides this though, it was apparently pretty smooth sailing. The cast all fell into place perfectly, shooting went well, and from interviews, everyone seemed to love working with Tommy as a director, got on well with one another, had a great time, and were proud of the work they did. So all's good, right? You've got a cool core concept, an established and celebrated sci-fi writer forming the base of the plot, the series creators are back on to produce, a great cast, a hard-working director, a massive name to sell it all on, and besides some heated rewrites, everything falls right into place. The ingredients were all there for a success, right? The reality though...
There was a horrible backlash that was crushing for me because, it was perceived as a flop.
Yeah, response to the film was pretty overwhelmingly negative. Critics didn't like it, and fans just wanted to see Michael. A lot of people have theorized that if it just didn't have that Halloween title, things might have been different, and I get what they're saying. It definitely hurts the film as it sets up a certain expectation that the film was just never going to deliver on, but I'd go so far as to say I think it could maybe even have had success with that franchise name. It's just that it was the third in the series and not the second. For me, I'd say some of the problem is that they're trying to set this up as an anthology series when a second movie has already released and suggested that's not the case at all. If the film order had went 1978's original tale and then this movie, you could probably have made the case that the only thing you need to make a Halloween film is to set a story at Halloween. But when Michael's had two outings, with the second being a direct continuation of his story, you've already set him up as the backbone of the franchise. It's his narrative. Once you've put that out there, you can't take it back. Of course, we can hypothesize about other ways this film's release could have been handled forever. At the end of the day, the reality is the risk really didn't pay off for them. Halloween 3 took the lowest box office returns of the series at that point, and by quite a large margin too, dropping in takings to 14.4 million domestically, an over 10 million drop from the previous title. And with the reviews ranging from bad to lukewarm, it didn't have much critical praise to fall back on either. But here's the thing. What was once the franchise's black sheep, the oddball, the true series low point in a lot of fans' eyes, has over the years found a little bit of shine on its star. In the decades since its release, there's been a lot of reassessment, and the film has found a bit of a cult audience and an avid sea of defenders. A lot of people who now, with that distance of knowing exactly what they're getting into before seeing it and not being disappointed that a certain mass killer doesn't appear, actually hold it as a high point in the series. Which begs the question, is Halloween 3 actually good? And the answer to that question is an overwhelming kinda. The film opens strong on a couple of solid moody notes that sell not just the atmosphere but also the film's themes. The opening credits cleverly tie the film into the rest of the series, but in a way that feels much more in line with the ideas of this film. An ominous synth track plays over opening titles of strange orange lines with a soft glow digitally drawing themselves onto the screen. As the lines pile up, we realise they are drawing a pumpkin. Not unlike how both Halloween 1 and 2 opened on those smiling jack-o'-lanterns. Except here, the use of the digital display marks a clever way to both link the movies that came prior, but illustrate we're getting something a little different this time. Following the titles, we're immediately greeted with the compelling drawing of an unknown man clutching a Halloween mask, desperately fleeing an unseen pursuer. All while an excellent score continues throughout and undercuts the whole scene with an air of mystery and danger. While we're on the topic, by the way, my God, this film has an amazing and incredibly underrated score. There's nothing in here as iconic as the main Halloween theme, but Carpenter and his collaborator Alan Howarth create such an impressive level of atmosphere, and every track is consistently great. Anyway, it's revealed that the people chasing this man are these strange, almost emotionless and incredibly strong men in suits. One almost kills him, but he is able to crush the attacker with a car and make his escape before collapsing at a gas station where the owner calls for help. Our man is admitted to hospital where we find out his name is Harry Grimbridge. It's here we're introduced to our protagonist, Dr. Daniel Chalice. Wallace, a messy but well-meaning and hard-working divorced doctor who has a strained relationship with his ex-wife and his kids, and possibly a bit of an alcohol problem. He's played extremely well by horror icon Tom Atkins, who previously collaborated with Carpenter on The Fog. He's got a real 80s action hero vibe to him, but not in the way that guys like Stallone or Schwarzenegger had. He's more of an everyman type, a little older, a little less in shape, a little more grounded, but still with hints of that macho 80s bravado, and he does well to get you to like him in spite of the character's flaws. Harry cryptically tells Daniel that they're going to kill us, all of us, but Daniel puts it down to him being manic. That is until later that night a man in a suit visits the hospital and murders Harry by just yanking his skull apart. Gross and rad. And then before Daniel can stop and question him, he blows himself up in a car. Haunted by what he saw, Daniel hits the local bar where he sees an advertisement counting down the days to Halloween from a mask company called Silver Shamrock. The same one his kids were watching earlier when he visited them to bring them Halloween masks, only to have his gifts rejected when they point out that their mother already got them Silver Shamrock masks. He thinks nothing of the advert, which I honestly don't know how, because it's pretty much all I've thought about for around 20 years, and while at the bar he runs into Ellie, Harry's daughter, who came looking for answers. She explains to Daniel that her father had an appointment book, and in retracing his steps theorises that whatever stuff he got tangled up in might have begun during a visit to a small town called Santa Mira in California, home of the Silver Shamrock factory that keeps putting out all those ads.
In 4 days to Halloween.
Yes, that one. We don't need to keep playing it. Determined to get to the bottom of what went on, the two journey to the town and find a small community that idolizes Silver Shamrock and its company head, COCHRAN, the lovable businessman who owns the factory that builds this season's most popular latex Halloween children's masks and is apparently the reason for the town's prosperity. However, Silver Shamrock's cheery and well-loved facade houses a dark secret. A local vagrant speaks out against the company and is murdered by the men in suits for his trouble. A woman who neighbours Ellie and Daniel in the motel they've checked into curiously picks at the metal that adorns the Shamrock masks, and it emits a fucking laser that melts her fucking face off. Alright. And when the next day the injured woman is discovered, she is carted off under the guidance of Colonel Cochran himself, not to hospital, but rather to the Silver Shamrock factory, and as Daniel questions this, he is met with avoidance. Investigating further, Ellie and Daniel, who at this point are shagging by the way because there's a romantic subplot shoehorned in that really doesn't need to be here, but this is an 80s movie so it's practically a given, take a guided tour of the factory where they discover more of the men in suits emotionlessly standing guard, watching and making sure no one sees anything they shouldn't. But Ellie does. Specifically, she sees her dad's car, and the men in suits don't take kindly to her discovery. The two protagonists flee and attempt to call the police, but they can't reach anyone outside of town, and before they can escape, Ellie is kidnapped by the men in suits and taken to the factory. Daniel quickly pursues, but is attacked and captured. He is then taken to a surreal laboratory setting that is very 80s, where Cochran explains his master plan. You see, Cochran stole one of the big blocks from Stonehenge. Yeah, I know, just let's go with it. Because he wants to return Halloween to its darker roots of pagan sacrifice and witchcraft, and he plans to do so by using occult magic and technology to activate the masks during the giveaway they've been advertising for. The idea being that when the broadcast plays, it will send out a signal that activates the fragment of Stonehenge he has put into the medallion on every one of his masks and kill the wearers in a particularly grisly fashion. Oh, and also those suit dudes are robots. He made robots. Yeah, it's a little silly. I mean, besides the core concept of a man building a Halloween mask empire and an army of robots that steal Stonehenge just to explode kids' heads is already pretty out there, but it's even more wild when you consider his motivations basically boil down to, it's just banter, innit? Just a good old friendly Halloween prank. A bit like the olden days. But ludicrous as the concept may be, thematically the businessman with the friendly demeanour using his corporate superpowers and the channel of fervent commercialism to harm society is pretty compelling, and Dan O'Herlihy is such a great actor that he perfectly balances that friendly facade while betraying the hidden evil that lies beneath. The material might be wacky, but it's sold with enough sincerity that you find yourself buying into it all the same. Also, we do get this grossly rad demonstration of his killer methods that's pretty messed up. Yeah, this movie turns a kid's head into bugs. Normally horrors won't kill the kid, But this shit's got no chill. Anyway, the film ends on an ambiguously chilling note. Daniel manages to escape and save Ellie on his way out, dropping medallions into the lab control room and activating the commercial, killing everyone except him and Ellie. Only, oh no, oh shit, Ellie's a robot. In an Invasion of the Body Snatchers style twist, Daniel has to kill the robot version of his girlfriend, which he succeeds at after a pretty gnarly little scrap. He then runs breathlessly to the gas station from the start of the movie and asks to use the phone, calling television stations and begging them to kill the Silver Shamrock broadcast. One station goes down and then another, but a third is still on the air. As the countdown to the broadcast carries on, we end on a final note of Daniel, desperate and screaming, begging for the broadcast to stop, but we do not find out if he is successful before the credits roll. And that's Halloween 3. Now look, this movie is perhaps a little unfairly maligned. It got this really bad reputation as this ill-advised and disappointing non-slasher entry into a slasher franchise, whose first film was probably the best slasher of all time. People going into this wanting something even slightly Halloween 1 or 2-esque were only ever going to be disappointed. It's a sci-fi really, with horror elements. It has more in common with an episode of The X-Files than it does with the film it pulls its title from. However, removing it from that context, this film is really not without merit. It has a lot going for it. Our three leading roles, that is Daniel, Ellie and COCHRAN, are all excellent. The soundtrack is moody and atmospheric and amazing. The visuals eke a kind of 80s feel that even most 80s films don't conjure. It's such a specific vibe it puts out. Like, you know how there's like this image we have of the 80s now when we make 80s nostalgia infused media where everything is kind of like pink and blue neons, but that's not really what the 80s actually looked like a lot of the time when you watch stuff from that period, and it's just more of a reflection of the parts we fixated on. Well, Halloween 3 is like the real 80s, because it doesn't look like those things, but still its effects are very 80s, its characters are very 80s, its sets and shooting locations are very 80s. I know I'm just saying 80s a lot, but you get what I mean, right? You get why this is different to this. And thematically, it actually has a lot of pretty interesting stuff to say. And yeah, it gets a little lost in the villain's silly motivations. Like, if you're gonna comment on commercialism, there should really maybe be some profit or power incentive for the villain to explain why this guy does what he does, but it still hits some interesting notes. A lot of times you'll get rich businessmen in stories and they're always like transparently greedy, ruthless oil tycoons or like violent criminals, and oftentimes they just don't quite resonate with our experiences in reality. Evil, influential, wealthy and powerful people tend to be a lot more insidious in their actions. There's often a concerted effort to kind of push this PR-friendly narrative that whatever they're doing is good, actually, and I feel like COCHRAN as a villain taps a lot more into that kind of stuff. And I think that's really interesting. I think it's cool how a lot of the community are shown to really like and even idolise him. Characters who he later goes on to kill. In amongst all of the oddness, I found this strangely believable. I fully buy that this awful, sinister character would be kind of propped up and adored as some genius entrepreneur, despite the fact that he essentially sells novelty garbage. The movie even goes so far as to explicitly have a character call him a true genius, and then later in the film gush poetically that he made his fortune selling absolute tat like sticky toilet paper. Like, whoa! I wasn't convinced of his intellectual superiority before, but now that I know he invented the practical joke of sticky toilet paper, I'm sold. All the stuff surrounding COCHRAN and his factory that isn't tied in with the occult and Stonehenge bits is really good. You know, he's got these literal unpaid, unfeeling drones working for him as the perfect employees. He's got this big unspoken hold on the area. I particularly like how prominent the factory sort of feels like it looms over the town. It feels really big and imposing, and visually to me that really sells the idea of this hold he has over it. And the concept that an injured woman is taken to the factory rather than a hospital, and this mostly goes unchallenged outside of Daniel and Ellie being like, huh, that's weird, is super compelling. Like, this idea that this community is just giving this dude total control over all aspects of their life, from their jobs to their general economy to their surveillance to, I guess, their healthcare? Because I mean, this doesn't feel like a first time occurrence. The guy seems well equipped for the scenario of needing to take dead or injured people to his factory, and he even decides what time the citizens can go out, because at one point he just announces a curfew, and I guess everybody is just like, yeah, let's let the dude who sells novelty masks decide we can't stay out after 6 PM, because, well, Well, he's got a lot of money, so I guess it makes sense. And all this, of course, ends with that chilling, ambiguous possibility that the commercialism won out in the end. It's all very riveting stuff and told with a nice 80s style and great performances. On the other hand though, I do think that in our reappraisal of this film, we've been so excited at the discovery that there's actually good stuff there that we forgot to acknowledge its flaws and weaker elements, of which there are still plenty. I've already mentioned the villain's motives are kinda silly and somewhat undermine the commentary you get from making him so face value nice but evil under the surface, by then just falling into this kind of caricature of evil that just really loves killing kids. Just loves it, mate. Favourite thing. The kind of guy who just sees a kid and thinks, oh, there's a kid whose head would be better as Bugs. But even besides that, the real problem with this thing is just that it plays out at a snail's pace. Now, I don't mind slower paced movies, so this doesn't bother me hugely, but the problem with Halloween 3 specifically is you've solved a lot of the mystery it's set up like 10 to 20 minutes in, and you just have to wait for the characters to catch up with you. Right at the start of the movie, when the guy blows himself up in the car, Daniel calls this lass who works autopsies and is like, hey, what was that dude's deal? Did you get anything from the autopsy? And she's just like, oh, I don't know. I've just got all this metal. That's weird. Someone must have given me the car parts instead of the body. There's no human element here. And so of course you're like, oh, okay, they're robots. It's so clear that they're robots. Like, the way they act makes you suspect it, and this line just confirms it. But there's 2 more check-ins with this lass about half an hour apart, just to confirm what you already thought from that first occurrence was information the audience was already supposed to know. Add to that just a lot of meandering and scenes that go on a little too long. The romance subplot is just like, there. It really adds nothing. The whole film could honestly be about half an hour, if not even 40 minutes shorter. It's got real pacing issues. Which is a shame, because when it's good, it's good. There's some real meat there. It's just a bit too spread thin. Lots to love, it just requires a bit more digging than maybe should be necessary. Would I personally recommend it? It depends on your patience for this kind of thing. I actually really like this movie in spite of its flaws, but if you're not one for slow films, maybe give it a miss. But if you think you're willing to just spend a bit of time with solid theming and good characters in its moody atmosphere and soundscapes, even if you know it's going to tread water quite a bit, then absolutely give it a shot. If nothing else, it's a very interesting curiosity for the franchise it's in, and for my money, in spite of its flaws, it's actually one of the best sequels. I don't know if that's a hot take or anything, but that's where I stand with it. It's a lot better than some of the stuff that comes next, if you ask me. And you will be asking me as it happens, because tomorrow we'll be starting to look at some of what came after with Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. So if you don't want to miss that, be sure to subscribe to my OnlyDans at the red button below and hit the bell to get that all important notification. Also, let me know what you thought of the video with a like and a comment, and if you're really enjoying the show, you can become a patron and support the channel at the Patreon link in the description, and of course get access to some cool exclusive features for your troubles. More info at that link below. Anyway, that's all from me for today, so as always, I've been Dan Drambles, you're watching Wholesome Halloween 2 Slasher Season, and I will see you tomorrow.